Okay. Your face is fine. Don't need to be there. Okay. No more questions.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's Human Trafficking Roundtable. My name is Bongiwe, Zwane, and I'll be your host this afternoon. Today's subject, I must say, is one that has scarred a life too many. Human trafficking not only rips apart families, but it also robs loved ones of family members. But of course, it has also exposed some holes in our legislation, but also on the part of law enforcement. Human trafficking has been described as a form of modern day slavery. Many of the victims are clueless victims who are recruited with the promise of being offered false jobs. In most cases, they end up being used as sex slaves and sometimes being forced into one form of labor or another. When we think of human trafficking, we often think sex trade. But what about a young man? Think about this. A young man who must work for a minimal wage until he repays his recruitment fee because those who have captured him have confiscated his passports or are holding his papers against his will. Or farm workers who are often held against their will and also sometimes forced to work without pay. A narrow view of what human trafficking is can prove a challenge when it comes to drawing up legislation or policies that can also see some victims being neglected. And also, if we take a human rights approach to trafficking, it means we put victims at the center of all policies that have been drawn up, as well as prioritizing the protection of their rights as well as their dignity. And that, ladies and gentlemen, begins the roundtable discussion. And I will also hand over to Dr. Vathiswa Papu-Zamxaka, who's the Deputy Vice Chancellor of Research, Innovation and Engagement at TUT, to welcome us to this roundtable.
Thank you so much, Bongiwe. To you as the program director, the panelists that are with us today, TUT staff and colleagues from other organizations, parents, student leaders, and TUT students at large. Good afternoon, colleagues. Firstly, I would like to thank you, Minister, for always finding time in your busy schedule to honor us with your presence whenever we invite you. TUT is your home, and we are happy to welcome you once again. The subject that we will be discussing today is one that is near and dear to my heart, particularly because I am a mother and a patriotic South African who has spent a great portion of her life working with the youth. We are taught by historians that the slavery of Africans started long before the colonization of Native Americans by Christopher Columbus in 1942. History also teaches us that the Portuguese started enslaving Africans in the 15th century. This is a time before the Islamic and Dutch colonization of African countries and centuries before the Berlin Conference of 1884. The ocean surrounding Africa made it attractive, colleagues, to navigators who were mostly traveling to India from different parts of the world. Even today, we see commonalities in the way in which the oceans surrounding Africa are used to trade or are used for trade and economic development. However, there are those who still see an opportunity to exploit Africans through slave trade to different parts of the world. The Mediterranean Sea and the Pacific Ocean still provides a gateway for the forceful removal of Africans from their native homes against their will to go make their capturers richer. When I had a look at statistics, I was shocked to find that over 45 million people are currently living under modern day slavery worldwide. These people are categorized into 3 general categories. 1, children forced into commercial sex trade. 2, adults forced into commercial sex trade, and forced child and labor and adult labor rather. And these are regular people we once called sons, daughters, friends, and neighbors, who are lured into slavery through the disguise of job opportunities and a better standard of living. Their dreams of escaping poverty and pursuing a better life soon turn into nightmares when they are stripped of their passports and belongings before they even reach their promised destinations. Available data also informs us, colleagues, that women and children from poor regions of the world are mostly afflicted by modern-day slavery. Economists tell us that human trafficking is one of the fastest-growing criminal businesses in the world, grossing an estimated $30 billion a year. One of the contributing factors to the expansion of this criminality is what is known as hereditary slavery. This essentially takes us back to the days of Jim Crow, whereby a child of a slave was born into slavery and condemned into slavery for life. Just imagine being born and living a life of a slave from day one until you die without even having a birth certificate to prove that you ever existed. The most disheartening part of this criminal trade is that the recruitment of the unsuspecting victims is performed by people that the victims know and trust. Economists also inform us that a rapid increase in human trafficking is a response to a demand that keeps growing. Therefore, if there was no market demand, there would be no supply. The implication is therefore that the drivers of the increase of this criminality are also ordinary people we call our neighbors, colleagues, and friends. Large multinational corporations have also been implicated in cases of forced child labor and adult forced labor under the most appalling conditions without any human rights. Some of these large international companies are also implicated in sponsoring recruitment of child soldiers in Africa for regime change and to gain control of mineral resources and drug trafficking in certain regions. It is therefore evident that the combat against human trafficking cannot be left to law enforcement agencies alone. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. wrote in his publication, "A Statement of Hope," the essential writing and speeches, I quote, open quote, "It may well be that we will have to repent in this generation, not merely for the vitriolic words and the violent actions of the bad people, but for the appealing silence and indifference of the good people who sit around and say, wait on time," close quote. It is clear to me that as institutions of higher learning, we can no longer wait on time. Now is the time to take a stand and step into the fray, particularly because universities are home away from home to many young people who are at risk of being lured into this trap. On days like this, I remember the Asian African idiom which says, "It takes a village to raise a child." The safety of our students is a responsibility that we should own collectively. We cannot afford to simply shift the responsibility to someone else. Edmund Burke writes that the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. Modern day slavery is a common challenge in our communities, and it needs a common approach regardless of your social standing, race, or gender. Lawmakers and government policies need support from civil society, from business sectors, and also from citizens as a whole to take the stand and push back against this criminality. It is my hope that our discourse today, colleagues, will yield some ideas of how we can move in unity towards pushing this scourge out of our society. I therefore thank you. Thank you, Program Director, and thank you, dear colleagues.
Thank you very much, Dr. Papu-Zamxaka. Thank you. Certainly giving us some points to think about, especially because, as you say, that, these are our neighbors. These are people that we know. It is certainly not people that are out of our reach, that are perpetuating some of what we are seeing really unfold, particularly in the world of human trafficking. If you've just joined us, let's give you a reminder. My name is Bongiwe Zwane, and I am a Newsroom Africa anchor as well as a managing editor for our input division. But certainly today we are, of course, operating under the banner of Zwane University of Technology. You can join the conversation on that particular page on Facebook, where we are live now, Zwane University of Technology. You can join us there and post your questions. We are going to be taking them and certainly presenting them to our panelists this afternoon, who are going to be giving us some of, their thoughts and sharing ideas. As you would have heard there, Dr. Zamxaka really talking about how at the end of this, we need to be thinking about some of the solutions. How are we going to be doing this? And quite frankly, one of the things that, she mentioned there, which is quite critical, is to reach a common goal. And a certain common goal is not going to come from government only, certainly not only going to come from the communities only, and also not from the law enforcement authorities only. So certainly this needs a multi-pronged approach into really delving deep into what is causing and what is behind this scourge of human trafficking. Before I go further, the minister unfortunately could not join us this afternoon. Government duties are always calling. Certainly we are still in the midst of a pandemic, and definitely we there is a lot that really then fights and competes for the attention of the minister. But we do have somebody who works very closely with the minister, and that is, of course, Thabo Mokoena, who is joining us this afternoon. Now, before Thabo, really it just gives us some of the strategies and their presentation from the Department of State Security, I'd like to tell you just a bit about his illustrious career. And certainly this is somebody that has been, quite around. In 2017, he was appointed by the Minister of Communications as the chairman of the Digital Migration Council. And during his tenure, he was also able to bring together major role players in the South African broadcasting sector and the leading South African telecommunications company. And this is, of course, to be part of that digital migration project that is, of course, so important in the country. And he's also served as a board member of several SOEs, such as Petro SA, Prasa, EDI Holdings. And internationally, Mr. Mokoena served and participated in various organizations such as the Commonwealth Local Government, United Cities and Local Governments in the ICLEI, Afro Cities, as well as the UCLGA. And he's also published and written some research papers, policy reports, case studies, and academic papers. This is certainly somebody who knows his story. And he currently, as a seasoned leader, he's currently serving as a special advisor to the Minister of State Security. And he's also the deputy chair of the Ministerial Implementation Task Team at the State Security Agency. And he's also served as a board member and trustee of the Government Employees Pension Fund. So certainly, Mr. Thabo Mokoena is quite seasoned. Mr. Thabo, if you can then unmute yourself and just really talk to us about, this problem, certainly a scourge that is not only beleaguering South Africa, but certainly the rest of the globe. It's over to you.
Thank you very much, Madam Facilitator. For a second, I felt like you were not really introducing me, but I also took notice that you preferred the line from digital migration, which is fairly closer to your sector and industry. Esteemed panelists, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to share some views, perspective, and analysis on the subject matter, human trafficking, human rights violation. Let me upfront offer the profuse apologies from Minister Ayanda Dlodlo. Unfortunately, she had to attend to some emergency matters in Malawi. Before your mind starts running wild, let me assure you, the visit is not about what you might think it is. Let us therefore contextualize the human trafficking. Various scholars and practitioners considers it to be trafficking in persons in the recruitment, transportation, transfer and harboring or receipt of a person by means of threat, of the use of force or other forms of coercion. It can also take place using adoption, fraud, deception, or abuse of power towards a person who is in a position of vulnerability, or through giving or receiving payments or benefits to achieve consent of a person having control over another person. Human trafficking is also the exploitation, which includes, among other factors, sexual exploitation, forced labor or services, the removal of organs for sale, and use in street begging rings. False job advertisements, adoptions, and illegal immigration are some of the methods that are used by transnational organized crime syndicates that operate in human smuggling and trafficking of persons. It is also argued, program facilitator, that human trafficking does not necessarily require that victims must be transported. They can remain stationary and still be classified as victims of human trafficking if they are being sexually exploited or serving as forced labor. What are some of the issues that comes out as the genesis and evolution of human trafficking? In the African human trafficking context, it is obviously and basically linked to slavery and exploitation and racial supremacy that prevailed since possibly the beginning of the 19th century or even earlier. In Southern Africa, the most famous example is the tragic and dehumanizing story of Saartjie Baartman, which was highly popularized, and I think most of us are aware of the traumatic and painful experience that Saartjie Baartman went through. Though the case of Saartjie Baartman was named as human trafficking, it contained common characteristics such as forced recruitment by deception and cross-border transportation for sexual exploitations. Hundreds of thousands of women and children have been trafficked from African continent for more than 100 years to either the Americas or Europe, something some opinion makers define as prelude to modern day human trafficking. Human traffickers recruit from either the country of origin, which is where traffickers recruit the victim for exploitations. Victims are moved into transit countries, which is an intermediary country where they are possibly in transition to another country. Then you have a destination country which receives the victim. Its economy, the destination countries, mostly their economy is generally prosperous enough to support either sex trafficking or forced labor. And then you have internal or domestic country in whose victims are both recruited, trafficked within the same country. It is argued by international bodies, and I want to make this point because I also want to contextualize as to where does South Africa feature in terms of those categories, internal, domestic, or is it a transit country, or is it like, countries of origin of. However, international bodies have argued, program facilitator, that countries which are either origin or intermediaries often have ineffective border control and corrupt government officials. There might be many other factors, but I think the issue of ineffective border control and corrupt government officials comes up significantly high when you analyze as to why do some countries either are intermediaries or are the countries in which, countries of origin where people recruit. But again, before one begins to put South Africa into its perspective and where it lies in terms of those categories, it is important to also underscore the issues of race, class, and gender dynamics within the human trafficking. And according to the 2020 report of the United Nations High Commission for Refugees, 72 people a month, they perish traversing the continent's land route. Many are subject to unspeakable brutality and inhumanity at the hands of smugglers or militias or traffickers. Some studies have suggested that there is a race and class dimension to human trafficking. Africans, especially blacks, constitute a disproportionate, overrepresented group in terms of both sex traffickers and victims. So Africans, especially blacks, they are it's an overrepresented group, both as traffickers but also as victims. It is estimated that, of course, there are, I mean, the Deputy Vice Chancellor has alluded to say that, you know, there are millions of victims trafficked annually. However, the cases that are either prosecuted or identified, they are estimated to be in less than 100,000. Again, one of the data from the University of Johannesburg estimates that trafficking occurs at slightly a higher rate for girls than boys, with 55.5% of trafficked people in South Africa being female and the balance being male. Ladies and gentlemen, the human and the smuggling and trafficking in persons is considered a big emerging global threat. There are numbers of billions that are being estimated in terms of, I think, how much the trade is costed. And then there's also projections that this is beginning to even surpass global illicit drug trade. The concepts of human smuggling and trafficking in persons are interlinked and often confused, and they are vastly different. Human smuggling relates to the facilitation of illicit immigration, while human trafficking involves the recruitment, coercion of victims to obey traffickers' instructions. I would want to go into possibly, I think, sharing with you some of, I think, our observations and an intelligence that has come out in terms of, I think, how it manifests in our society and some of the initiatives to begin to deal with this particular problem. Recent intelligence indicates that transnational organized crime syndicates dealing in both human smuggling and trafficking in persons, they are in collusion with corrupt law enforcement officials, employing various methods such as bribery, falsified documents, and digital technology to circumvent security measures and facilitate the trafficking of persons. According to statistics from the South African Police Services, 2,132 cases of trafficking in persons were reported under the Traffic Act between 2015 and 2017. In South Africa, adult victims are more often than not tricked or trapped with false promises as opposed to being kidnapped. So adult victims, they are more kidnapped as opposed to being tricked. An example is in 2019 case in which law enforcement raided hijacked buildings and established that bogus domestic worker recruitment agencies lured unsuspecting women from Lesotho by promising them domestic work in South Africa. Passports or travel documents of those victims were confiscated and they were confined to those buildings and used, you know, either as domestic workers. A large portion of their salaries who are, for those who are placed as domestic workers, is taken by the operators of these bogus recruitment agencies. Those who are unable to secure the work end up like working as sex workers. These are some of, I think, the specific initiatives by our law enforcement agencies to begin to unravel and I think resolve or, you know, undertake a path to solve some of these particular crimes. There are other examples of such trafficking cases, which I think I can read, but program director, maybe it is wise to proceed. Convictions were also secured in other forms of exploitation, such as labor trafficking. In Mpumalanga, a boy of only 6 years old was forced into child labor. Furthermore, in Pinetown, in KwaZulu-Natal, illegal adoption scams purporting to sell children for between 5,000 to 15,000 on the Gumtree online classified platform were detected and disrupted by our law enforcement agencies. In 2017, Mine Security arrested young males between 9 and 18 years who had been trafficked to South Africa to work in illegal mining operations in the Welkom Free State area. So there are a number of, I think, anecdotes and case studies which one would possibly share, but maybe for the sake of time, I would want to, to proceed into other areas. The modus operandi employed by traffickers engaged in trafficking people from countries such as Pakistan, Bangladesh, Somalia, Zimbabwe, Mozambique, Malawi, and Zambia are well known and they are understood, at least to the security agencies in South Africa. Ethiopian, Somalia, Pakistan, and Malawi traffickers, they traffic persons from their countries of origin for the purposes of servitude in the businesses. Pakistan traffickers fly their victims from Karachi via Kenya to Malawi. They travel by road to Mozambique. Ethiopians are also trafficked via Malawi, Zambia, and Zimbabwe. Technology gives traditional forms of crime, especially organized crime, a new dimension. The internet also offers human traffickers an unprecedented opportunity, which they have been quick to exploit. Traffickers, in collusion with corrupt government officials, organize fraudulent asylum seeker papers and identity documents. Syndicates dealing in trafficking in persons find it comparatively easy to carry out their illicit activities in South Africa due to easy availability of fraudulent travel documents and high levels of corruption at the ports of entry. They cover the cost of travel expenses, including the cost of bribes and fraudulent travel documents. So, ladies and gentlemen, these are some of, I think, the modus operandi, and I think the issues that we begin to trace as the security cluster or the security forces to be able to crack down on this particular crime. Of course, the issue of cyber technology has also made it very difficult, or it exacerbated the particular problem. But we, the security agencies, together with other research partners, we continue to try to be, ahead of the syndicators in terms of dealing with this thing. The following are some of, I think, the issues that we need to consider for us to be able to cap the threat posed by trafficking in persons. We need to address the competing views regarding the veracity of reported human trafficking and children kidnapping cases. Unless we can be able to qualify and quantify the veracity of the problem, we will not be able to put adequate measures to. So I think the issue of ensuring that we address our statistics, our data, and our information on this thing, it's important so that we have a proper informed information. We need to address trafficking in persons facilitated by the use of the internet. I think, therefore, that requires of us to be a step ahead when it comes to cyber technology. There is, Madam Facilitator, a National Rapid Response Team, which is operational, the anti-trafficking frontline response at the national level, providing a coordinated response from different law enforcement agencies. And I think those particular efforts we need to be able to support. I do have lots of other materials and stuff, but program facilitator, let me rather take a pause at this stage, and thank you very much for allowing the minister to be able to share views with you on this particular subject. I think, as the Deputy Vice Chancellor have indicated, it is a matter that is should be our top priority. It's at the heart of our human rights, and I think every life it's very important, and we ought to definitely make sure that. Thank you, Program Director.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mokoena. Certainly, you know, those are really, really important pointers. And I must say, at the beginning there, as you touched on the issue of digital migration, I can tell you, you know, how the media and that issue really never let it go. But thank you so much for your remarks this afternoon. Certainly a lot that we have taken here and a lot to unpack and to also really focus on when we then really do get into the engagement of questions and answers. I do you know, see that we do have some questions that have started coming through. As a reminder this afternoon, remember, we are live on the Zwane University of Technology's Facebook page, so you can post your questions there and we will get our panelists to respond to them in the best way that they can, so that we are also then able to really put our heads together to understand of how exactly do we get to the bottom of human trafficking, and of course, how do we end it once and for all. Certainly, this live broadcast is going on until 5:30, so certainly we are, of course, into the last bottom half hour of our conversation. And but that, of course, does not bring the end of this particular broadcast. We still have quite, you know, two speakers who are going to be talking to us about this very subject, and they deal with students. And there's been concerns, of course, that are being raised in some of our campuses about the safety in our campuses and just how some students are finding themselves in danger. And the next speaker is, of course, currently serving as the chairperson of the Dr. George Mokari Academic Hospital Board. He also serves in the Council of Vuselela TVET College, where he also plays the role of the deputy chairperson. He's also previously served in the Council of Ekurhuleni East College as the deputy chairperson of council and the chairperson of the audit committee, and is also a member of the hospital board of the George Mokari Academic Hospital. And he's the former president of the National Association of Student Development Practitioners in Southern Africa, and this is a role that he has occupied since 2009. And his academic qualifications include a master's degree in entrepreneurship from the Zwane University of Technology, and he's currently working as a director of student governance and leadership development at TUT. And this, of course, the biography that I'm reading of Mr. Kukuletu Xaba. Over to you, sir.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much. Nazwane Mangete lingamkhonta amafawelinga phansi naphezulu zikote. Our program director. Special gratitude to Mr. Ntamo for organizing this wonderful roundtable for all of us to be able to engage in such an important issue. Oh my goodness. Greetings to Mr. Mokoena on behalf of the Minister Ayanda Dlodlo, and thank you very much, Dr. Zamxaka, our Deputy Vice Chancellor, Vathiswa Papu-Zamxaka, for being with us as part of the panelists. Colleagues, I just want to share some light issues because I can see, you can hear from the introduction which was done by the DVC and also the presentation which has been done by the department from Mr. Mokoena. They are giving the actual facts, but I want to take this thing and give it a human life in terms of what's happening at universities. As you would know, a university is a free space which offers educational platforms to learn about societal challenges, to develop evidence-informed scholarships that helps to shape our interventions and policies concerning these issues. So these institutions have an implicit responsibility to serve the public that created them. Thus, it's important for us to engage in these conversations. Moreover, universities have a responsibility to provide a safe environment for both staff and students who are working there and who are getting education in the university. Thus, I want to share with you a few situational issues that I've picked up as and when we are giving service to our students at universities. Many students are pursuing degrees at the universities while they are being survivors of human trafficking and abuse. And another thing that I've noticed is that all of us, students and staff, are vulnerable to this thing called human trafficking. If we are not careful, we may find ourselves being victims one day. The question then remains whether the university is capable of providing assistance to students who may become victims of this risk. There is little guidance that the universities provide about how to support survivors and victims. That's why we welcome the engagement with the department so that we can begin to forge some partnerships and ensure that we address these issues as universities and the state. There is little dialogue as well about the role of institutions in higher learning in response to sex trafficking and other related crimes. So we need to have more dialogues. Thus, I want to really appreciate Mr. Ntamo for initiating this conversation. My own story is as follows when it comes to this thing. I used to think human trafficking was an overseas problem, you know. My conclusions were based on movies like Taken. I see a girl being taken and their friends, and then I thought, oh, it's an American problem. These Americans have serious problems. You would see a group of Asians in American movies being transported in a container ship and some trucks, and then boom, suddenly these people are in trouble. So I used to think that was their problem, not our problem. So unfortunately, I later thought it was a problem of rich people, that rich people are being kidnapped, or sometimes they kidnap each other for money. But then I started to see familiar faces. I saw people in Libya being taken by the Libyans, Africans being taken by the Libyans in boats and ships. And boom, I started to realize that this problem is not a white problem. It's not an American problem. It's the world problem. While I was looking at that, I started to hear names which are familiar of people who are being trafficked. Bongiwe, Thandi, Mpo, and Amahle in Tsakane. Then I realized this is a big problem. We need to start paying attention and do something about it. When I started to hear about people from the township being involved in this thing, then I started to be worried. Then it began to happen in our own university. That's why I want to give 5 scenarios that I've noticed within campuses in our universities that have made me to realize that this thing is upon us, especially those of us who are in campuses which are city-based. The first incident, the first scenario was a suburban middle-class girl in one of our campuses in town, in Pretoria. A girl disappeared. And this girl disappeared after a day. The friends began to be worried because the girl left campus with a boyfriend or a friend who was coming from another country, and they went to Sunnyside, and the girl did not come back home. And the girl got scared, and they started reporting this thing to the parents of this girl. And they reported it to the university officials as well. And there's something that the students in that campus did. They launched a campaign to go and find this girl who got lost. They went to Sunnyside, every place where they knew this girl used to frequent with their friends. They went and they looked for this girl from Centurion. This was a middle-class girl, remember? It's somebody who is coming from a good family, a middle-class family. They've been protected for a long time by their parents. They've not been exposed to things. How I then characterize this child is that this child was lacking street savviness. For many times and many years, this child was protected by parents. The students went on a search, and after a day or so, the student found the girl. The girl was dragged, but thank God the girl was still alive. But that thing taught me 2 things. The first thing is that this thing of not being street savvy, being street smart, being city smart is a problem. We need to do something about it. Number 2, it taught me something because students launched a Facebook campaign, Twitter campaign. I began to see that no, this human trafficking problem, because this was showing us that there is a risk that our students may be taken advantage of by some people and end up being trafficked sometimes in the future. But I realized that as long as this thing becomes a secret, when a person disappears, we say nothing about it, we do nothing about it, then it thrives. The students took this thing to Facebook, Twitter, and everywhere. That's why then even the thieves could not hide. The students went looking for the student themselves, and the thieves could not hide, and then they released the girl, and the girl was found dragged. So this thing thrives on secrecy. So we must make sure that as and when we realize that a situation like this happens, take the information out there in the social media, in the media, and then the thieves will also be afraid of traveling with such a person. Number two, a second incident and a second scenario was when I came to understand. I had a conversation with a student. This student was a child without parents. The student grew up in these places which are called child and youth care centers of the social development. The child grew and passed matric and came to the university. And it happened that during recess, the child did not know where to go. For the first time in my life, I realized that there was a rule within these homes or youth care centers that when you reach the age of 18, you must leave. This child was in trouble, and it happened that at least we managed to connect the child with another family for research purposes. But then I started thinking about it. If this child did not have such an intervention, what was going to happen in her life? These are the things which are making these students to be vulnerable. Number three situation was students who come to the university after going through some social mishap. We had a conversation with students, and one student shared her story. And the story was like this, that I used to be married before, and I was in an abusive relationship. I divorced, and I lost everything. I came to the university having nobody, having no support, having no money. How was I supposed to survive? And that thing showed me that there is a vulnerability. Number four incident was a student living with abusive parents. These students were being abused by their parents. During recess, they must go back home. These students are now in a crisis. How do I go back home? What do? They end up with sugar daddies and the people who end up abusing them. The last incident was the lack of safe spaces for young people that have fun, to have fun and to enjoy themselves. In Soshanguve campus, there was a situation where a group of some owners of nightclubs will send kumbis every Friday to fetch girls to go and have fun in Sunnyside. And then what they will do then, they will spike their drinks, and some of these students were never found they never became normal again. They disappeared, and some of them, they dropped out of school because we didn't have safe spaces to have fun. Thus, I want to propose that we need to intensify awareness programs on these issues and these situations and the things that make our students to be vulnerable. Number two, we need to establish independent living facilities for students who are living away when they reach 18 from these safety zones. There must be other places where they can stay. Number three, we need to facilitate proper handover between social development of all the students who are funded by the state when they are handed over to universities. Number four, we need full funding for girl children in universities so that they cannot rely on sugar daddies, but they can have enough monies for their needs in the university. Lastly, program director, we need to provide safe spaces for having fun for young people where they don't have to be fetched by kumbis, by people who are having sinister motives, and they end up raping them and trafficking them. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Klaba. Certainly providing safe spaces on campus, and I can tell you that these are some of the concerns that I'm starting to see on the Facebook page, as some have really posted their comments as well as questions around, safety on campuses. We remind you, we are live on the Zwane University of Technology page, and you can join the conversation. We are, of course, going to be having a Q&A session in just a moment. But our speaker, then our last one for this panel before we take your questions, is Dr. Vathiswa Papu-Zamxaka, who is a research and innovation leader currently serving as Deputy Vice Chancellor for Research, Innovation and Engagement at the Zwane University of Technology. She holds a PhD degree in public health from London South Bank University in the United Kingdom, and she also worked at the Medical Research Council as a senior scientist and as a project director for Microbiocide Trials Network at Perinatal HIV Research Unit. Dr. Vathiswa Papu-Zamxaka, it's over to you.
Thank you so much, Program Director. In view of the time that is left for us, let me be brief and straight to the point. Program Director, panelists, TUT staff and colleagues from other organizations, as well as parents who are with us today, student leaders and TUT students at large. allow me to take a different angle this time around. As I've been introduced as a Deputy Vice Chancellor for Research, I would like to take the research angle and also share with the colleagues that have joined this session, what have we done as an institution as far as research is concerned on this topic. I will only highlight just 4 aspects that have been shown or that have been depicted from the research that have been conducted by our institution on this topic, Program Director. One highlight is that the problem of human trafficking in the country does not actually start with the traffickers, but it grows largely from certain conditions that propel victims into searching for greener pastures under the circumstances that make them vulnerable to exploitation. That stems or emanates from the hangovers from apartheid and colonialism. The deteriorating living conditions, the deepening poverty, high level of unemployment, inequalities, illiteracy, among others, they exacerbate this menace. Secondly, corruption is one cancer worm that has eaten deep into several socio-economic and institutional fabric of the South African state. Though it is relatively difficult for us to state categorically which sectors of the state is the most corrupt, but research over the years on corruption in South Africa has shown us, or it has reported, that it is an endemic phenomenon. Human trafficking is a form of organized criminality, and traffickers bribe easily. Thirdly, our research in the institution also pointed to ineffectiveness of existing mechanisms. It is so unfortunate that from our research, it has been discovered from the respondents that we got answers from in one of the research that we've done, that mechanisms were put in place by the criminal justice institution, especially SAPS and NPA. Much of these mechanisms are not effective. There are blame games among the criminal justice and criminal justice institutions. Lastly, the nexus between human trafficking and social institutions in South Africa. Human trafficking is a phenomenon concealed in criminal enterprises, I've explained in my opening earlier on. It is essentially a product of the gaps in current socio-cultural milieu within which the Republic operates. Much of these lapses stem from the broader society vis-a-vis its social institutions. Pertinent among these, Program Director, social institutions are families, schools, peer groups, religious and traditional institutions, and the media. So what are our recommendations? I'm trying to cut short. I can see that we're really running out of time. Allow me just to point out our recommendations based on research that has been conducted. One, the innovations offered by information and communication technologies to the 21st century world should be harnessed to strengthen the partnership operations in communities with the goal of combating human trafficking crime in the long run. Secondly, there is a need for the establishment of a special court to try human trafficking matters. The delay in judicial proceedings is one factor that hinders the successful trial of the trafficking officers. Lastly, developing educational curriculum on human trafficking for students in South Africa, going by the findings on the level of awareness of the populace of human trafficking, notwithstanding the several sensitization and campaigns by both the state and NGOs in South Africa, there are still gaps in knowledge on what exactly constitutes human trafficking. Let me pause there due to time. Otherwise, I would have shared with the attendees some arguments that have been raised by a number of research projects that have been conducted in our institution. I thank you.
DVC, thank you so much. I tell you, this is an indication that it shouldn't be the last of this roundtable, particularly as we're getting comments on social media and some of the questions as well. And even from what you've just shared, it tells us that we're only just scrapping the surface. We need to go deeper when it comes to this particular issue. But I will not waste time. There are questions that have started trickling in, and I'll start with a question that is directed at you. And this is a question that is from Huitzemang Apane, who is asking, what is the People's University doing to assist the government on the subject matter of human trafficking and as a center of knowledge?
Thank you so much. That's a very good question. As well, at the People's University, as you might have noticed that I took the angle of research in my talk, which is one of the cornerstones of institutions of learning. However, the research without societal impact, it is no research. So this is what we're engaging on with our researchers in our institution, asking a question of societal impact. And you must also bear in mind, by the way, that the research that we're talking about today is a research that is done in communities. So in a way, through our research, we are engaging, we are impacting our societies. But I agree, we still need to do more. And this is a robust discussion that we're handling with our researchers in the institution. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Mokoena, one of the questions that has come through, and I'd really like to, follow up even on the presentation that you made earlier, talking about corrupt, officials, porous borders that are also proving troublesome to really crack this particular syndicate. How important then is a multi-pronged approach, an approach that not only includes government and law enforcement agencies, but also society in curbing and ending human trafficking?
Thank you very much, program facilitator. I think that there has been an acknowledgement from government itself that government and law enforcement agencies on their own, they will not be able to adequately address. As I've indicated earlier on, to say, you can see the stats that we have on reported cases are far less, and they don't show an indication as to where these cases are taking place and then how. So a social partnership between the communities, and I think I like the way Mr. Klava was able to demonstrate how the universities, the students has taken it upon themselves to go and look for a particular girl. So in that kind of an action, you need to include the law enforcement agencies, because you will be able to retrieve the person that you're looking for, but you will not be able to arrest the perpetrators. And that's where the law enforcement. So I think broader partnerships are required, but the issue of corrupt border officials being bribed, and I think we now understand here in South Africa that it's a bigger issue. But the DVC has also indicated to say, we're living in communities. Some of these officials that we're saying are corrupt. They are part of our society. They are part of our family. So our society needs to rise up and say, hey, Mam Zwane, hayi mana uyeke lento yenzako, because ayimoshiwe na wedwa, imosha ilizwe. So I mean, beyond that we as a society beginning to up our morals and ethics. There is so much that the law enforcement will go. But we welcome these initiatives, and I think we want to partner further and dwell into the researches that has come through, so that we can then be able to improve the government agencies tackling of the matter. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Certainly, a very important point there that you make about really coming together. And Mr. Klaba, I'd like to then bring this question to you, because Rodney Sipho is touching on something that you have really touched on and really just painted it as clearly as possible for us. He says, seeing that numbers of human trafficking incidents are on the rise from a student affairs perspective, what is it that should be done to ensure that students, especially young women, are safe both on and off campus?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. As you can see, this is a student affairs program. We have put it online so that many of our students can be able to access the content. We need to train the trainers as well. Train us as student affairs people as well, Because like I said, I was also ignorant about the level of this problem in our society until I started seeing tangible things. So awareness campaigns, that's why I welcome what Mr. Mkwena is saying, partner with the universities, let's spread the weight. Let's do film. We've got filming department at TUT. Let's do short films, which are highlighting the veracity of this problem. Also, we also would like to run more talks, let's get victims to come and talk about what happened to them. Give them confidence and let them talk to people. Because the more victims talk about things, it's the more others' eyes are open. Especially the students who come being aloof, being unaware, being ignorant of the social setting. We need to fast track our students in terms of being street smart, because most of our students, our parents are so strict to the point that students end up growing up and even getting a degree being ignorant on what is out there socially. They end up even with wrong guys, they end up with wrong people. Their drinks are being spiked because they are not aware that these things are out there and they are happening. So we need more partners to be able to work with us. We've started as our first step. We'll take the second, the third, and the fourth step and make sure that at the end of the day, more people are aware. Like Kosas used to say, each one teach one. We've started and it's rolling out now.
And if I can follow up on that, how then do I as a parent, because I really want to protect my child, but at the same time, as you say, they've got to be street smart. How do I balance the two to make sure that they don't get out of hand and become overexposed into certain things, but at the same time for them to know enough to be able to protect themselves then?
Parents must take responsibility of going out there with their kids. Like for instance, we who live in suburbs, we need to visit the township more frequently with our children. Also, we must walk with our children to these places so that they can see in a safe environment what's happening in those particular places. Also, there's a lot of information on the internet as well. In your safe space, in your home, expose your children to these things and these dangers, because there's a lot of information out there. Make sure that you package it in a way that your children are exposed on what dangers are out there, which are happening. Because at the end of the day, government alone, university alone won't be able to do the job that the parents can do. We're going to do our part, but we need parents, families, communities, uncles, aunts, and everybody else to play a role in dealing with these things.
And if I can then come to you, in Tate Mokoena, because certainly, your presentation really also raised some of the critical, questions. How then is it difficult for victims to come forward and report some of these cases? Because then sometimes there's issues around budgets when it comes to investigations for law enforcement authorities.
Well, look, I think that there is no level of crime or victimization that we should be able to attach budgets to. But I think in as far as when the cases are reported, they have to be investigated. And of course, I think we know the challenges that are there in our country in terms of prosecution. To what an extent do people are arrested, found guilty, and then end up in prison? So that's another story that one would not necessarily want to venture in. But I think we do encourage, and people should be able to report the crimes that are there. But I think the other thing, Bongiwe, that is important is that it's one thing dealing with outside people coming into our country as traffickers, but it's also another thing and I hear how Mr. Kaiwa keeps on saying parents must teach kids to be street smart, they must expose them to Alexander Soweto and stuff. I think we need to also have a campaign of saying to South African citizens who are perpetrators, stop this thing. You can't be doing this. This is the most dehumanizing, type of activity. Because, I always say that we know the perpetrators, we know the criminals. There are some of their brothers, our sisters, but we do not go an extra mile to stop this thing that you're doing, including us volunteering them to the police. We need you to go and so people must report the crimes. The law enforcement must do what I acknowledge that many people have been they have been disappointed that their cases have not been, prosecuted properly or what, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't report. But communities must also report this thing. Not only reporting, they must also deter and stop people from human trafficking. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ndate Mokoena. I do have some comments on our Facebook page there, the Zwane University of Technology page. Jabulile Ngomane Kamshika saying we need more of these roundtables. Big ups to all the speakers. I certainly do agree, because there's a lot that I've learned, I tell you, this afternoon. And Pumlani Mapanga saying that I think relationship is most important in all aspects of fighting human trafficking. If institutions shy away, which means they are not engaging within the students and the communities, a whole law enforcement authority agencies. I'm trying to understand the last part there, but DVC, if I can just tally at the back of this particular comment here. As a university at a practical level, what are some of the things that are being done to ensure that the students are really equipped with information to be able to avoid finding themselves in such compromising situations?
Thank you so much, Bongiwe. As an institution, maybe let me start with a disclaimer to say, as I said earlier on, there's still a lot that needs to be done in this space, especially as far as awareness campaigns are concerned. Yes, we do engage in them, but as I said earlier on, we have not extensively did what needed to be done. So we are in agreement, and we are ready to roll our sleeves to ensure that there's much more of the awareness that has been brought, so as to safeguard our own students. Thank you.
And that I really am going to say this should wrap up our discussion, but with a heavy heart, I tell you, because there's really a lot that needs to be said around the subject of human trafficking, because as Ndate Mokoena really pointed out, I mean, when you look back at what he had to say, 2,132 cases reported between 2015 and 2017. Certainly those are worrying figures, because even one simple case of human trafficking is seriously concerning. And even, a child as little as 6 years old being forced into, forced labor, certainly it does look like we do have quite a lot of work to do, as you say, DVC, there in peeling the layers of this onion, in order for people to understand that trafficking is not only about sex, it's not only about drugs, it's not only about being put inside a container and being shipped into another country. It takes various forms, even forms of, the removal of organs for sale. Certainly a lot of concerns there, but I certainly do hope that this is not the last time we really do engage in the subject. And I do want to thank you, to you, those who have participated on the Facebook page. Certainly, a lot of insights there, a lot of pointers for those, in student affairs to know exactly how to deal with these particular challenges. Dr. Vathiswa Papu-Zamxaka, thank you so much. And just a reminder that she's the Deputy Vice Chancellor for Research, Innovation and Engagement at the Zwane University of Technology. We also had Mr. Kukuletu Aba, who is currently working as a Director of Student Governance and Leadership Development at the Zwane University of Technology, as well as Ndate Thabo Mokoena, who's a Special Advisor to the State Security Minister. Thank you so much for your time this afternoon. Certainly, this is not the only conversation we are going to be having on this subject. And as the DVC said, it continues even on campus. It will continue on social media, because certainly we need to rid the country of the scourge of human trafficking. From me, Bongiwe Zwane, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to share this afternoon with you. Thank you.